Hey, my friends. This episode was supposed to drop back in the summer, and, the ongoing stresses, tensions, and dramas of rebuilding after the fire basically have delayed it till now. So this is the return to podcasting, and I'm hopeful to be back on a bi-weekly schedule, starting with this episode, and, continuing going forward. If you have been waiting to visit the store, shop online, or book a reading with me, all of those businesses are back online, and I appreciate your continued support with that. Welcome to another episode of the Hermit's Lamp podcast. I am joined today by Mal Strangefellow, and I've been following Mal online for quite a while, and recently he's gotten into starting a church, and a lot of the dialogue around that has been very fascinating to me. So I thought that inviting him on to talk about some of these things would be really entertaining, because I think there's so many fascinating questions about legitimacy, legacy, lineage, and all sorts of stuff that people are or ought to be thinking about as they're going about in various traditions right now. And at the birth of something new seems like a great place to revisit those conversations. So for people who might not know you, Mal, give us the introduction. Who are you? What are you about?
Oh, wow. And I don't mean this to sound like I'm bragging. It's mostly just because I'm getting older and my memory is lagging. But when you've done, I don't want to say so much, but when you've done enough, at some point it starts to become difficult to figure out how to answer that question.
Sure.
I got my start in esoterica during the mid 80s. I'm solidly in that boomer cusp, early Gen X region. Went into the army right out of high school, and after that got it into my head that I wanted to be a Buddhist monk. Mm-hmm. And ended up doing that for a number of years. I was a Tibetan Buddhist monk, novice, and fully ordained getsu and gelong. After a few years, early 90s, wanted to go and get a college degree. Went to the University of Oregon, go Ducks, and it discovered that it's a lot harder to be a celibate monk in a university than it is in a monastery. Go figure.
Imagine.
And ended up returning my vows. And at that point, I just kind of wandered back and forth among a number of different things, sort of exploring alternate routes of spirituality, continuing to practice magic. Of course, the internet was really just sort of starting to become popular at this time. We were moving beyond the text-based green screen kind of stuff and actually getting a graphical interface to the internet. Discussion boards, alt magic, of course, was going like gangbusters. This is just at the cusp of the infamous Golden Dawn wars of the early to mid 90s, and ended up getting involved with the Golden Dawn. Was actually my neophyte initiation in the Golden Dawn was done with Israel Regardie's handmade tools. And I believe a mutual friend of ours, Poke Runyan, was the Carix for that, and he gave me his flu. So
it's a magical blessing indeed.
Right. And it kind of there was some floundering, I would say, towards the late 90s. Got involved in the Temple of Set, stayed there long enough to be recognized to the third degree, their priesthood. At which, and I bring this up because it encompasses sort of a pivotal event for me. James Grabe was also a member of the temple and a member of the OTO. And at the time when I actually met him in person, he was on the outs with the current leadership, Hymenius Beta. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I've never done any OTO stuff, so that guy. And I don't know what there was. I don't know if they were. I think there was some sort of lawsuit or something. Anyway, they were pissed off. We were at a conclave, which is an annual temple gathering, and we were in the hotel bar and just sort of chatting. And I was a second degree adept at the time, and so I was starstruck at his degree and his history. And we were just talking, and he was mostly talking. And he had mentioned that he had apostolic succession as a bishop. And one of the things, among other things, that the current leadership wanted from him was consecration as a bishop for their EGC. And he was basically just inviting them to peruse the fine example of the back of his middle finger on that. Mm-hmm. And, he said, basically, I'll consecrate, anybody else, anybody but them. Hell, do you want to be consecrated? And I was like, yeah. Okay. It's like, all right, cool. So we actually made a plan for the next night. He had a suite in the hotel, and I showed up, and we went through deacon, priest, and I was consecrated a bishop that night. And he was like, there you go. Now you're a bishop. And I was like, well, awesome. Thank you. This is 98, 99-ish. And which oddly enough feels like, maybe 5 or 10 years ago for me, but
sure.
I was like, so what do I do with this? He's like, fuck, I don't care. Can I say fuck? I can say fuck, right?
You can say fuck. It's fine.
All right, cool.
Go ahead.
Fuck yeah. He was like, I don't care. Here's some stuff. And I got like loose leaf printouts, some ideas that he had about sort of a Johannite spirituality. And, I got, an old Xeroxed copy of his succession, apostolic succession and stuff like that. And I just sort of filed it away and did nothing with it until after I resigned from the temple as a priest. It was, interpersonal political stuff.
Wasn't it always, right?
Right. It's there was a group that was up and coming in the temple. They have since been purged out, but I was not in that group, and ended up just resigning rather than dealing with all of the people bullshit that comes with that. And in trying to figure out, all right, what the hell do I want to do now? Said, well, I've got these kind of things to fall back on. I wonder if I could do this. And so I pulled out all of James's stuff and decided, what, fuck it, I'm gonna start a church. And that's how the Apostolic Johannite Church was founded. I ended up posting on a couple of message boards online at the time. Hey, are you interested in an esoteric organization and an esoteric church? And got a couple of hits. One of the very first ones was, of course, the current patriarch of the AJC. And, the rest there is history. I ran the AJC for a couple of years, and at that time kind of felt like I had some unfinished stuff that I wanted to do elsewhere. Plus, I feel like, at least for me at that time, it took a different personality to run things than it did to start them. And I didn't know that I had the personality to keep that thing going. And I feel justified in making this statement, hindsight 2020, but just in looking at how well they've done, since I handed it over to Sean McCann, their current patriarch, I think it's the largest, fastest growing international Gnostic church on the planet right now, some crazy crap like that.
So let me ask you a question.
Yeah,
because you've talked about so many things here, and I want to.
I know. I'm sorry.
No, it's why I had you on. I want to have these conversations, and I love hearing you chat. What what kind of personality does it take to run these things? Because I've been in my share of, I was in the OTO in several different groups that all imploded or exploded, and I was in the Aurum Solace for a bunch of time and changed the leadership, and it, my local group was excommunicated, and I was in the AA for a while, and there were various things with that. That just left me, with nowhere to go.
Mm-hmm.
What is it, and I've seen my share of that in the Lukumi traditions as well, in different places. What does it take to run a thing like that well? Because I feel like there's, what I've seen is there's like, if there's a strong personality and they can kind of hold it together with their personality, that works until it doesn't, until they leave or retire or whatever. But what actually does work? What makes sense when it comes to sort of bigger organizations around that kind of stuff?
I think you kind of hit on it with the big personality, not in that that's the answer, but in that that's not the answer. I think a strong personality, a willingness to get shit done, to say, you know what, screw it, we're going this way, we're doing it. Like, that's the kind of personality you need to start something, to really get it going, to gather people in, to inspire other people. But to keep it going, I think you need somebody a lot more conciliatory. Somebody who is open to, willing to, desirous of working with other people and incorporating them into the living, the daily life of the organization. A strong personality, again, I think it's absolutely necessary to get a thing started. There's just so much inertia there at the beginning of anything that you need to build up a certain amount of momentum to overcome initial obstacles. And nothing kills momentum faster than a committee meeting,
especially if not much is already happening. Right.
So you need that strong personality. But after you reach a certain point, I think that strong personality becomes detrimental. And if you don't have it within you to drop that and become more conciliatory, then you're just kind of you're kind of a bully. You end up with, strong personality clashes with other people who, who might be able to come in and do amazing things. I think, so a perfect example of this, going back to where I was and where Sean McCann was at the beginning of the AJC when I handed things over to him. He'd only been a bishop for like a year.
Okay.
I'd consecrated him. And to be fair, I had even gone, right after his consecration, I went on vacation, like 6 months. And I was like, you know what? I just need a break from all of this. I'm tired. You run things. Call me if you need to, but I'm out for a while. So, really, even that first 6 months, he was kind of running things. Because of his age and because of his natural temperament at the time, not really sure of himself, not wanting to make a mistake. He was naturally more accommodating and conciliatory. So the current primate of North America for the AJC, Martoma, was a bishop with another organization who came into the AJC. We'd become friends while I was still there, but he officially joined the AJC after I left. And he is a very strong personality, but he's also been, has been just an amazing asset for the church. And, in looking back, I don't know, would I have given him the same opportunity? When you've got the two alpha dogs clashing, right? The two strong personalities, would the same results have come about? And I'm not so sure that it would have. I think by me stepping out and by Sean coming in and having that natural conciliatory manner and welcoming him in, excuse me, as another leader, I think that was a huge part of their success. And so what does it take to run an organization? I think it takes the ability to find that in yourself, to realize that, it's not all about me.
Mm-hmm.
If I care about this, if it's going to run, I need to be conciliatory. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so, for sure. Because, a lot of people a lot of what I've seen is it gets to a point where people are just like, look, it's my way or the highway. And then,
Right.
and then you just have, whatever, right? Like the thing around the apostolic succession where they're like, will you please give this to us? And be like, absolutely never. Like you just end up in these things where it's so stuck that there's no movement possible, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, when you lay down something like it's my way or the highway, you end up with a ton of fantastic people choosing the highway.
Yeah.
And you're left with, just the sycophants. And what happens to the organization then? I mean, you mentioned your experiences in the Aurum Solis. And I remember, when Leon proclaimed it an all-Christian organization when he was still, Grand Master. And, it was it. This is it. It's my way or the highway. This is what we're proclaiming.
Mm-hmm.
A bunch of people chose the highway. And then he kind of pulled back from that a little bit, and then somebody else took over, and then you did this. Anyway, I think that's a perfect example of what you were talking about. When you have leadership like that, things tend not to grow organically. And even if they do survive that personality, that type of personality, they don't survive the end of that personality.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
That person dies or converts to evangelical Christianity and says, unicorns are bad or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I also think it's interesting how I wonder how, contrary to what people might think, that sort of more conciliatory aspect actually works to sustain the teachings versus dissipate them. Because what I see where there's no or nominal flexibility is then there's these sort of backlashes and waves that come back and forth, right? The new group comes in and they're all into witchcraft and that's it. And if you're a Christian, you're out, right? In response to the Christians who are like, well, we're Christian, and especially in a group like the Aurum Solis that at least sort of in its heyday was so founded on research. I mean, I think that, what are you losing, by these massive sways, right? So,
right.
Yeah.
And also you get, you get buy-in from everybody when, regardless of the kind of organization, right? Whether it's a business or a teaching order or a church, or you get buy-in with conciliatory leadership. People feel like they have ownership, they have a stake in it. And so they care about it and they want it. Whereas if it's just, here it is, it's my way or the highway, and then, well, okay, it's your way. It's never my way at that point, no matter where I am in the organization. If I'm not on top, it's never my way. It's always I'm doing their way. And, we as people, we tend to like our way.
Well, and especially more magically inclined people, right?
Right.
I mean, there's a tendency towards ego, not necessarily in a bad sense, but just ego that doesn't really, if it's not addressed in some capacity, So how did you find the transition, or how did you sort of manage that transition from Tibetan Buddhist practice, which is pretty, which is very structured, to kind of your other practices, which sound like they were through lines, but they weren't as rigid, if that's fair?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
About that.
Yeah. Actually, I think it was being on sort of those diametric poles was beneficial to me. As structured and rigid as Tibetan monastic life was, the Temple of Set, on the other hand, and I think why why I enjoyed and sort of embraced what they were doing so much was because they're so much more open, right? You show up, and one of their primary tenets from the book of Coming Forth by Night is, the text of another is an affront to the self. So every initiatory degrees, okay, it's time for you to be recognized as a second degree adept. They don't confer initiations. They recognize after you've achieved something, and then they say, okay, well, now go write that that initiation ritual. Go do it. Go create it. Come up with your own. Have it. Don't just pull crap out of your ass. There's a very scholastic aspect to them. I think when I joined, I got a binder that was like, and I'm holding up my fingers, nobody can see them. It's like 1.5 to 2 inches thick, and the vast bulk of that was a reading list. So and part of recognition is their recognition process is go out and read these books, go out and study this material, go find more, and then come back and tell us what you think about it. So there's this scholarship and then this production, and it's really, I don't want to give the impression that it's this loosey-goosey kind of thing, but it is very different from the structure that I experienced in Tibetan Buddhism, right? And I think I tried to incorporate some of that in my later work, and it's still something in my own personal practice, and when I'm working with students, it's still something that even down to giving them often a reading list and saying pick 6 books or pick 3 books or whatever, read them all from different categories, and then come back and let's talk about how what material from this book on this topic and this book from this incredibly different topic, how do they play together? What do you get from reading both of those back to back that you wouldn't have gotten from reading either one separately, right, in isolation? What new comes out of that? And I think that's sort of been, that came out of that experience of strict, rigid practice with Tibetan Buddhism, and then the more open, but scholastically informed Setianism, like this kind of was born out of that. And I think that has been, regardless of what I've done since, is sort of my entire method of approach for things. Does that make sense? I really feel like I'm just rambling on this.
No, not at all. Yeah, it totally makes sense.
Okay, cool.
I mean, for me, I kind of went in the opposite direction. I was doing ceremonial stuff, throwing some chaos magic and, all that kind of different things. And then as I moved into Lakumi and, the Orisha tradition that I got initiated in, there are just ways that things are done, and it's been a move away from that kind of structure and a stepping into that structure. And what I see is that so many people struggle with that axis, for people to accept that there is a way that things are done, or in light of a tradition, the way that things are done, and that part isn't subject to conversation so much, is very difficult for a lot of people. But
it's also a really important experience, I think. I went from the founding of the AJC into East Asian esoteric Buddhism, Tendai, and from there Korean Zen, Sun Buddhism, and those are both. I mean, you don't get more rigid than the Japanese,
right?
And there's a purpose for that. There's this idea that when you take all of these people together and you force them to do this sort of thing, this sort of way, we kind of polish our rough edges off, and if everybody was just allowed to go off and do their own thing, you would never find your rough edges. And so in practicing Tendai Buddhism and then in going through, the Zen Buddhist koan curriculum, it was very rigid. There's a way you do it. There's even an entire different language almost for going through koans. that if you don't know it, and if you don't do it, you're not going to pass. You're not going to advance. It's almost like learning that language, which is both poetic and performative. There's a physical aspect to it, but learning that language is what allows your brain to operate in the way that it needs to operate in order to get the insight that you need to get.
Sure.
There's no book that you could read that could tell you that. There's a story out of Dido Laurie's place, Zen Mountain Monastery, back when he was still alive. They had a book with all the answers to the koans in it, and somebody stole it. And one of the head monks was like, ran up to Dido Roshi and was like, hey, somebody stole the book. What are we going to do? What if they publish it? And Laurie Roshi was like, yeah, don't worry about it. Mm-hmm. The answers aren't in the book. It doesn't matter what was written down. The answers aren't in the book. Yeah. The answers are what we see in front of us. It's like, I live here in Cincinnati, and if you read a ton of books about Cincinnati, but had never been here, and then tried to pass it off, in talking to somebody that was born and raised here, they'd know pretty quickly you're full of shit. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you've if you've been there, if you've visited there, if you're talking about, oh man, did they finish the construction over on, or, all of that sort of stuff that just, then they're like, oh yeah, you've been there. Mm-hmm. So I think there's definitely value to this is the way things are done for a lot of traditional things, just because if you don't do it that way, you don't get the experience or have the effect that it's supposed to provide. Mm-hmm.
For sure. Well, it's why, my experience of memorizing tables of correspondences when I was doing ceremonial stuff, I mean, on the one hand, it's like, well, why memorize it? There are books. But on the other hand, it preloads your cognition with a framework that stuff that wants to work within that framework can then work straight through, as opposed to, Absolutely. Having to attempt to bridge that gap without that extra framework there, Yeah, it's possible. Absolutely. Anybody can have a vision of, take your pick, and that might be authentic and whatever, but it's a lot rarer, and it's really atypical, as opposed to sort of the, that more, you've done the work, set up, and now they're going to show you a thing in this way.
Absolutely. Well, and putting on my clinical psych hat, in the middle of all of this, I also went on and got various graduate degrees in psychology. We know that the thoughts that we think change the physical structure of our brains. Mm-hmm. And so memorizing tables of correspondences, it's not just putting information in your head so that you can have it a quick recall. It's literally making a physical change to your brain. Mm-hmm. Is that physical change necessary? Is that, an integral component to the experience that you're trying to have? Maybe not, but maybe it is. And if that's the case, if it's not just about being able to have something on immediate recall, in which case, why don't I just preload 777 on my phone? Sure. And then if I need to know a correspondence, I'll pick it up. If it's not just about having that piece of information, but if it's about the change that it's affecting in your brain that is allowing you to maybe perceive or experience, something, then, by not doing it, you're either never going to get there, or like you said, it's going to be really damn rare that mm-hmm. you get the experience that, that you're hoping for.
Yeah, I think the real answer is the magic is in many, many parts of it, right? And not just in the quote unquote secret word that activates the ritual or whatever, right? It's exactly. So many parts of it that are not they're not necessarily glamorous. They're almost never talked about overtly in books or in other contexts, right? I almost never see anybody talk about that when I read a book about magic. It's like, yeah, and then you just like do this thing and it'll happen. It's like, oh, maybe so.
Sure. It's just the magic word. You just say the word.
The word. Well, the bird is the word, right? That's what we'll go with that.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I was going to say, Aidan Wachter recently made a post that I think brilliantly comes to this point, and it was, how did it go? See, I brought it up. Now I should at least be able to remember it. But it was along the lines of, the vast majority of success comes from mastering the basics.
Yes.
Not from some advanced, rarefied thing. And he was coming from it from both an esoteric and a physical, point of view. And I thought it was brilliant when I saw that.
Yeah, I remember that post. He was basically sort of saying like, sure, some super custom tailored fancy technique might get you this extra increase, because it was coming from a fitness training point of view, the article that he linked to. But the reality is showing up 4 days a week and, doing the basic things, that's going to get you almost everything. And the other stuff is, especially over the arc of time. Right. So,
right. And that applies to so much of what we do, right? Just showing up and doing the basic stuff. And
yeah, absolutely.
Oh crap! There was. Where was I going to go? There was. Nah, never mind. It'll come back to me if it.
Let me ask you this question then. So
yeah,
we've popped out this term a couple of times here and there. Gnostic. What does that mean to you? What does that mean? Like I hear it a lot. I've seen it a lot. Crowley talked about it a bunch. Different people talk about it. There's the Knights Cathars and all that stuff or whatever. But what does it mean to you? What is it actually? What's the relevance of it at this point in time?
Sure. Well, so first off, a caveat. I technically I don't even really identify myself as Gnostic anymore, which I suppose is actually kind of peak Gnosticism in itself.
We live in a post-Gnostic era,
right? And I'm glad when you asked, what does Gnosticism mean to you? Because it is it's we apply it retroactively to a lot of ideas, right? None of the ancient texts, like none of the Gnostic Gospels say, and I'm now writing this Gnostic Gospel, or, Gnosis, for me, the way I learned it, the way I taught it, and the way I experienced it, Gnosis is knowledge as opposed to information. And specifically, it's that noetic apprehension that comes after the sort of dianoia, the after the intellectual information gathering and crunching, and it's an apprehended knowing, to in the spiritual sense. I mean, more mundanely, it's just knowing, right? It's eating peanut butter rather than having somebody read off the ingredient list of peanut butter to you. So that you can never tell somebody else what peanut butter tastes like. You can taste it then, and then from then on, you will forever and always know what peanut butter tastes like, and that is, exponentially different from knowing what goes into it. And so. In a spiritual and in a magical sense, then gnosis is that experience. I mean, just like we were talking about, that experience that comes from doing certain things. And it's specifically that experience that can only come from doing certain things, as opposed to just reading about them, whether that's in esoterica or spiritual, religious, and oftentimes those are blended. You can read about an experience of the divine, or you can have it. I think one of the most underappreciated esoteric texts out there is by St. John Chrysostom, in defense of the hesychasts. So hesychasts, heretic Orthodox, not heretic, but almost near heretic Orthodox sect. Okay. Excuse me, who practiced hesychasm, this mystical combination of the Jesus prayer, kind of a yoga position and breathing technique that they said would allow you to experience the energies of the divine. In fact, advanced practitioners of this were said to literally physically glow. Like they would just glow in the dark. And this got a lot of bishops' panties in a twist. And John Chrysostom wrote this brilliant defense of them, basically laying out theologically why this theosis, this knowing of God, is not heretical. They're not saying they can know God, because you can't wrap a finite mind around an infinite thing, but you can experience, right? Can you hear that humming right now?
No. From your side? No.
Yeah. So my mic, I'm going to flick it real quick. That fixed it. Sorry, I've got a loose connector there. But you can experience it. You can have an experience of it. And he likened it to a number of different things. One of them was, sitting in a ray of sunshine. Mm-hmm. You know it. You can experience it. It's not all of it. Nobody's saying it is, but that's gnosis to me. That experience.
So let's I'm going to ask you a really unfair question. Okay.
Okay. Sure.
So how do people determine what is different between an authentic gnosis with something, with a spirit, with God, with wherever, and a more psychological or, even intellectualized engagement with it, because there's so many people who have experiences of different things. And, going back to your Zen stuff and to your Tibetan stuff, there are very clear things that are markers, right, for what's an authentic experience, And I even remember when I was in the Orm Solace, I came to my teacher and I was like, I had this experience with one of the archangels, and they showed up in this way. And he's like, great. And then he pulls out a piece of paper and pulls out a book from his notes about it and shows me what I saw. He's like, that's because you've moved beyond your own cognitive stuff being in the way of that connection. Yeah. So how do people know that though? Or how do people even begin to work with that if this is a new idea for them?
It's the easiest way is having a teacher, right? Sure. There's the famous story of Gampopa and Milarepa, the yogi Milarepa, who was Gampopa's meditation teacher. And at that time, the Tibetans generally don't meditate in groups. They don't do silent meditation. They get the instruction, they go away, they practice, then they come back. And Gampopa came to his Milarepa after some time practicing, and he's like, I don't know what's going on, but I'm beset by devils constantly. This is what... And Milarepa was like, just chill out, keep doing the practice, that'll all go away. A few months later, Gampopa comes back again, and he was like, teacher, you're so right. It's amazing. All the devils were chased off. Now I'm visited constantly by angels and dakinis, and it's just wonderful, and it's bliss. And Milarepa was like, that's cool. Just keep practicing. That'll go away.
Sure.
Having that teacher that can guide you, in Buddhism, especially in Tibetan Buddhism, emptiness, shunyata, big deal. And having an experience of emptiness is a big deal. Like, this is one of the major mileposts. And the literature is just, I don't got a bad connection. The literature is just scattered with warnings about, don't intellectualize this. Don't intellectualize this, because when you do, when you get an idea in your head of what that experience is, you reify it, and then you're stuck, right? You're stuck with that idea, and you think, oh, I have had this experience, and therefore this and without sort of that external verification by somebody else who's been there, right? Without talking about Cincinnati with somebody who's also been there, and confirm, yes, absolutely, I know exactly the street corner you're talking about, or, whatever, you can easily be led astray. How does somebody working on their own do this? Well, that's tough, at that point, I think you have to, initially approach, unverified personal gnosis, UPG, with skepticism. Yeah. I think that has to be the default when you're on your own, no matter how amazingly lifelike in 3D this apparition was, or like initially approach it with some degree of skepticism, keeping in your mind this could just be wishful thinking, or this could be, whatever, and then give it time, right? If it was a teaching, if it was a practice, does it bear out?
Yeah.
Are there external things that coincide with it? If you're given a vision of this, amazing new practice, and then the very next day somebody randomly starts talking to you about, a symbol which is exactly like the linchpin for that practice, or, somebody brings you something that you specifically need in order to, you look for confirmation still from outside, even if it's not from a specific like teacher in a lineage of a thing. You're still looking for that external confirmation, and it may not be for years and years and years that all of a sudden something happens and then it clicks and you're like, oh my God, I had that dream 3 years ago about this, and here is it. Holy crap, this is okay, then you go with it. But no, if somebody shows up and just says, hey, you're the chosen one, or, you're yet another incarnation of Alistair, or, whatever, maybe keep that in your back pocket.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that time will tell, right?
Yeah.
Time will tell. We'll see if this holds the test of time, for sure.
Right. And you can have, I think, amazing personal experiences that are meaningful to you, that you never say anything to anyone about or do anything with. And that's okay. They don't have to be huge revelations, or they don't have to be, even if it was something that was just the product of your own mind, maybe it's useful to you. But again, I think that in order to tell the difference between a genuine experience of gnosis, like that, it's external confirmation.
And so that brings back sort of one of the other questions that I wanted to check in about. What role does lineage play for you in all of these things? I mean, I know in my Lukumi lineage, lineage is everything, I mean, you are in my tradition, you are initiated into the lineage,
Right.
Lineage becomes your family, and that changes so many different dynamics because of it. It's not just about the information that was passed from person to person, but it's actually the license to practice certain things, the requirement to practice them in a certain way in accordance with lineage, and a connection to all of those spirits who carried that lineage forward. So it's a very living, dynamic thing. What role does lineage play for you, and what do you see as its sort of values and challenges?
Wow. I'm going to cheat and refer back to something that I wrote a while ago.
Cheating is always welcome.
Okay, cool. I tend to think in terms of 3 different kinds of lineage for any organization.
Yeah.
Physical lineage, practice lineage, and ultimate or primordial lineage, right? And what do I mean by these? The physical lineage is just the people, the stuff, right? The boots on the ground, the people doing the thing, the buildings, the institution. The practice lineage is the stuff they tell you to do, right? These are the teachings that ideally have been, tried, tested, passed on, initiatory aspects of initiatory power, right? That are meant to facilitate things. Obia or apostolic succession. These are all conferrals of a power meant to facilitate something. Sorry, I'm going to thump the mic here again.
I think you might be picking up on someone's running a shop vac or something downstairs.
Oh, okay.
Also hearing that in the background.
Then I'll trust it's on your end and not mine.
Yeah.
So yeah, the practice lineage there, and then the primordial lineage is what you're ultimately connecting to via these 3 things, right? So the physical lineage exists primarily to transmit to the people it brings in the practice lineage, which then facilitates connection to the primordial lineage. And, the first two exist ultimately, they function only to the point that they do those things, right? If at any point the physical institution loses its connection to the primordial lineage, they're dead, right? It's just it's a fossil. It's a club. It's cosplay or whatever. If the practices no longer facilitate connecting you to that primordial lineage, then they're not doing their thing, right? They don't work anymore. But then once that connection to the primordial lineage is made, at that point, new practice lineages and new physical lineages can be instituted. Without that connection, they can't be. This is one of those things that, like in Buddhism, people, there's this idea from people outside of it that, for example, tons of sutras attributed to the Buddha. But, we know historically he didn't say these things. The Buddha didn't write that. The Lotus Sutra isn't taught by but no, technically, yeah, he did, because within, with the game rules of Buddhism state that there is only one enlightenment, right? Buddha means awakened. Once you have had that experience, right? Once you're connected to that primordial lineage, there's no difference between you and Siddhartha Gautama, right? So if you have legitimately had that experience within the game rules, you can write something today and say, this is a text by the Buddha. And that's, 100% legit. There are institutions where I think you can bypass some of this, but I find them to be so phenomenally rare, right? The person that just stumbles upon either a practice lineage that works to connect them to a primordial lineage, or okay, a big example of this, with what I'm doing now, apostolic succession is a huge thing, right? There is a conferral of authority and power with that, without which none of the other sacraments will be there. Period. Full stop. Yet within broader Christianity, very few people question the legitimacy of Paul as an apostle. Because in the middle of his, previous life as and I don't know if you can hear the air quotes I put around that, as a, assassin for hire, he had this vision, on was it the road to Emmaus, I think. Anyway, he had this vision of Christ and he converted, and now he's an apostle. Mm-hmm. And I think most people in the broader Christian world, okay, we'll accept that. You won't find any apostolic lineages, I believe, tracing themselves back to Paul. I'd be surprised if you did, but nobody lists him as an apostle with an asterisk by his name, kind of thing. Yeah. But you also then don't hear about this happening all the damn time. Mm-hmm. Nobody spontaneously, well, damn it, okay. The Gnostic revival in France in the 19th century, Jules Douinel. Yeah, okay. He claimed it, but then even he went on to get actual apostolic succession. So, I think it's rare. I think it's a lot more rare than people think.
I think there's a big difference between a connection to a spirit, and mm-hmm. even a spirit that might have, I'm certainly not the reincarnation of Crowley, but perhaps I could connect to his spirit in a way, and his spirit could act as a guide and an animating force in my work.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying that happens per se, but that could happen, and that is not uncommon. Right. There are lots of things, where
But when
some
those things do
emissary
happen,
yeah.
but when that does happen, there's a lot that preceded that.
Yes.
Right. It doesn't happen to, the random grocery store clerk who has, never even picked up a copy of book 4 or, whatever.
For
Right.
sure. Yeah.
It's so.
Yeah. But that experience is also not necessarily the same as the experience of that connection to that primordial, energy or the current, even though if I was connecting to Crowley, I'm connecting to, the prophet of Thelema.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that I'm actually connected that step behind that,
Right. Right.
And I think that that's also an interesting distinction, and that's where lineage and traditional initiation facilitate that, because you may connect to that current, possibly, as you say, there are examples, but I think there's a big difference between connecting to a spirit that engages your work and guides you, and something sort of one step further beyond that into that lineage,
Right.
that deeper force,
Right. And access to one aspect of a lineage also doesn't necessarily confer access to another aspect of lineage. So I have apostolic succession via the episcopi vagantes, the wandering bishops. And we may trace our lineage, even up into, popes in Rome, but that doesn't make me a Roman Catholic bishop, right? That's the physical institution. And even though I might have access to both primordial or, both practice and primordial lineage there, that grants me absolutely no standing whatsoever in the physical, lineage kind of thing, which is something I think a lot of people tend to forget, especially in the independent sacramental movement. They tend to not get that these things are they're disparate. They're separate. They're discrete things. Yes, generally they're connected, and hopefully, if you get involved in one, it is. But yeah, if you stumble across it, if you just happen to meet up with some guy in a hotel bar in Ontario and this sounds so bad now that I'm saying it out loud, get invited back up to his hotel room to get consecrated as a bishop one night. Great. That doesn't mean, you can show up at the Vatican and be like, where's my room?
Like, that dude, he initiated 50 people that week. Come on. We're not interested.
Right. So it's, lineage is important. And, I'm sure you could make the case that even though I'm breaking it down into 3 different things, that you could say, well, they're really all the different aspects of the same thing. And you could probably break it down even, break it into 4 different aspects or 2 or whatever. But, in general, I think for those 3 reasons, at least, lineage is important, especially in religious, spiritual, and esoteric bodies wherein the point is connection with something higher, with that primordial aspect. If the point is just education, then lineage is by the book kind of thing, like the modern grimoire revival.
Sure.
There's no living lineage, Solomonic lineage that's passing this kind of thing. No, it's you find the book, you as best you can decipher what the hell they're talking about. You do it as best you can, and you hope like hell you have an experience similar to what they said you're going to have. And that's kind of it. The book at that point is the lineage until you make that connection. The book then is the practice lineage. There is no physical institution, physical aspect of it. And then, hopefully you do the practice until you get that connection that then continues in your work. I think a physical institution could happen, but it's not necessary. So I guess even in that sense, there is a lineage. You're just accessing it through the information that's passed on through both having the right book, having the brains to figure out what the hell it's saying, and then having the guts to follow through and do what it's saying.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to look at some of that stuff as more more technological, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, I mean, more in that second realm of the practice,
Yeah.
than the lineage, because I think that you can, to some extent, plug some of that into whatever lineage you might have access to, right? Or whatever sort of primordial element you would have access to, you know?
Right.
When I was very interested in those kinds of things, you know, I was not interested in the Golden Dawn. I was very interested in Thelema. And so I would just go through and swap out all the words, you know, the words that weren't thelemic for words that were thelemic, and do work in that direction. And then use that sort of connection to that primordial juice and that piece of it to, you know, call up whomever and be like, hey, listen, by the power of Babylon, you're going to do this, or whatever, you know. And I think that's possible, because the grimoire stuff can be more technological maybe than sort of lineage based necessarily.
Yeah. In general, I tend to think tech is tech. But, you know, then again, there are lineages where, without having the appropriate lineage, doesn't matter what knowledge or information you have, it's not going to work, or it's not going to work the way you want it to. You know, when you look at Tibetan Buddhist magic or just Tibetan Buddhist practice, you know, if you don't have the empowerment of a particular deity, the practice is at best ineffectual, and at worst dangerous, because you're in effect, you know, trying to contact these powerful personalities, and they don't know who the hell you are. Right. It would be like showing up at, I don't know, pick a famous powerful person who could be dangerous to you. I don't want to make this political. I immediately think Trump. Right. Not that anybody, I don't, you know what? I'm not even going to go there. But yeah, you pick a person with temporal power, right? Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. He seems like a really nice guy, right? I mean, everybody in Canada seems so super nice to us here, you know, in the hinterlands. But I bet, as nice as he is, if I went to Canada and I saw him on the street, if I came running up to him at full tilt saying, hey, Justin, let me, you know, trying to get, I'm thinking there's some people that would tackle me to the ground.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, and so, you know, the empowerment, the connection to that lineage at that point is the facilitation of that contact, right? It's somebody coming in who has that connection, somebody who's saying, hey, you know what, let me introduce you to my good friend, Mr. Trudeau. And then once they facilitated the introduction and we've shared a couple of drinks or whatever, at that point, you know, I can then, you know, wave from him from across the street, and maybe he'll remember me, and then we bump into each other, you know, that sort of thing. And I'm absolutely convinced that Tibetan Buddhism can't be the only place where something like that is required, where if you don't have the hookup, if you don't have the official connection to that lineage through the prescribed means, you know, best of luck to you.
Yeah. Something might happen, but who's to say what it is and how it's going to go.
Yeah. Whether or not you wanted it.
Exactly. For sure. So we've been chatting for a long time, because this has been really lovely. And I want to ask you one more question before we wrap it up, though, because there's one other thing we haven't gotten to, which I was delightfully enjoying on your Facebook, which is there's various statements of Gnostic belief, you know, or this sort of, you know, where you're discussing how you believe in, you know, the fallen angel and the energy that comes with that, and how you believe in Christ in this way, and how you believe in, you know what I mean? If we think about the Apostles' Creed, we have a very clear example of a statement in that direction. But, you know, all sorts of traditions have their own. But you're seemingly contradictory from some people's perspective. Ideas about the nature of the universe really both sort of tickled my fancy, and if that's not a weird thing to say, and sort of reflected a bunch of my own kind of contradictory or apparently contradictory notions about it. So I'm curious what you were looking to do as you were expressing that, and sort of what kinds of beliefs you have around, the nature of the universe in that kind of construct.
In general, I have a very dim view of belief. I think they're very dangerous things. People ought to stop having them. When I post that, I think one of the worst things that ever happened to the world was, and this is ironic, I think, coming from me, is Christianity and its emphasis on creeds. Christianity was weird for any number of things when it arrived on the scene. But one of the things it was most weird for was that it was a creedal religion. It was, it pivoted around what people believe, as opposed to what people did. It wasn't performative. And, this idea of having right belief then is something that came into play. And, I think history has shown us what a dangerous thing requiring right belief can be, and then determining that. When I post shit like that, and I feel absolutely justified in calling it that, a lot of times it's just to kind of work out for myself what's been bouncing around in my head, what's going on at the time, and also looking for a little bit of that sort of external verification, right? If everybody responded with a, "What are you on?" or "Did you not sleep last night?" or, then I know, okay, this is maybe a little bit out there. But then when I get responses from like, that really tickled my fancy, or, that's a sign that, okay, maybe I might have figured a little bit of something out, or maybe I might have glimpsed a little bit of something here. And I think having creeds that don't fit together nicely works together well for me. And by having beliefs that are paradoxical, that aren't, that are sometimes juxtaposed against each other, is beneficial. I mean, it goes back to, I think, what I was talking about with my own sort of practice, where, you take these two disparate things, you take these two different books, two diametrically opposed, see what comes out of it, see what you make from it. And I think a lot of times the thing that makes something paradoxical is really just a limitation of our language.
Sure.
I get a lot of, I think I get the most pushback, for example, with the Church of Light and Shadow, which is, my newest endeavor, because I talk about the morning star, and people are like, well, okay, you seem to be implying that this is both Jesus and Lucifer. Which is it? And I'm kind of like, well, yeah, we have this tradition that Lucifer is the fallen angel. However, there's only one figure in the Bible who ever identified themselves as the morning star. That's Christ in the book of Revelation.
Sure.
And the more I sat with that and their specific roles and functions, especially the, not the Satan of, the Hasatan, or, of the opposer of
or
the
Anton
Testament
LaVey.
lore. Right. Yeah. But the more the Lucifer of, Milton and Dante, and, the very popular romantic Promethean myth of Lucifer that we have today, that is very much a Christ figure when you look at the role that Christ played, right? Christ did not show up and be like, all right, everybody just do what the temple priests say and follow. He was very much an ego-driven individual. I mean, we can consider the Gospels as spurious as we would like, as far as whether or not this figure Jesus actually said these things. But the one thing that, when you get to the Jesus scholars that came together and trying to figure out, well, what's most likely that he said, one of the things that they had pinpointed as most likely coming from Jesus, based on what we know of the context and what got passed, his doing away with the old law and saying, "A new law I give to you." right? Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and love your neighbor as yourself. And what people gloss over here is it's not saying love your neighbor, which by that he means everybody, right? Love everybody else. He's not saying love them more than yourself. He's not saying debase yourself before. He's saying love them as yourself. And if you don't love yourself a great deal, you're going to be shitty at loving anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how Luciferian is that? You know, and so looking at these two figures in that way, looking at them both as light bringers, you know, in fact, it was not until I looked at the Gospels and teachings of Jesus from a Luciferian perspective that they really started to make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
It does, for
you
sure.
know, and so I think there's definitely something there, and this perspective is not new. I did not make this up.
Sure.
This idea of having a sacramental Christian church practicing folk magic is also not new. You know, magic and Christianity have been tied together for as long as there's
Catholics everywhere, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I commented recently on Facebook that, you know, if you're not ready to accept that Christianity is a weird necromantic cult, then you're not ready to study church history.
Yeah.
But when looking around for this, you know, for something that really embodied and embraced that, I couldn't find it. There's nothing, you know, like there's nothing out there. There are Catholic witches that are, you know, going to mass and, you know, practicing in private or in secret. And there are Christian, but there's no organization that's embracing both of these things. And the more I kept looking for this and the more I kept posting, you know, both things like, you know what, I believe this and I believe this. And the more feedback I kept getting from people saying, you know, yeah, me too. Where's that from? This ought to be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I'm a firm believer that we have enough independent apostolic Christian churches running around. I don't know how familiar you are with the independent sacramental movement, but in general, you know, you end up with jurisdictions of one. Somebody belongs to a church long enough to get consecrated a bishop, and then they're out of there so they can go do things the right way.
They had a great experience while they were in Vegas from somebody they met in the bar. And,
right.
Next thing you know.
Now they're off.
Yeah.
You know, and so I get in trouble. I get people in the independent sacramental movement angry with me when I tell them, you know, look, if it's really about the mission, like you say it is, you would stop what you're doing, find a larger church that's actually already doing this and doing it a lot better because they've got the bodies and the resources, and you join them. You're doing this just for the title. And so I was loath to start yet another church, you know,
well, and I think just before you move past that point too, and I think that there's also value in doing a thing like becoming a bishop for yourself. You know,
absolutely.
That's great too. You know, I mean, many Orisha practitioners become priests for their own well-being, you know, and that's fantastic. But be clear about that, and then go from there. You know. Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, I went for years ordaining people and limiting their faculties. So when you're ordained a priest, you receive faculties or permissions from the bishop that tells you what you can and can't do, basically. And I would ordain esoteric practitioners who just wanted that plug in to apostolic succession for their own spiritual and magical practice. And I would tell them, well, okay, great, but without any sort of pastoral education, I'm not going to license you to do any sort of pastoral work. You don't get to go start a church. You can say mass in your home privately, that sort of thing. That's fine. Just go be a private priest. And it took a lot to move me away from that and decide, okay, you know what, I think I am I think there's enough momentum around this to do something about it, to found it. I'm a firm believer in, if you have an idea for something great and nobody else has done or is doing it, maybe that's a sign it's supposed to be you. And after poking around and getting enough encouragement, I decided, all right, screw it. We're going to do it. But if we're going to do it, this is how it's going to happen.
You're the person you were looking for.
I am. I was the person I was looking for.
Uh-huh. I hate when that happens.
It means a lot of work.
It means a lot of work. Yeah. It's so much easier when you can find a person to be like, don't worry, Mal, I got you. Come to the party. Everything's all set up. Just bring a salad and some hummus.
Exactly. You bring the dip and the soda. That's like the lowest rung of, that would have been great. But in order to do this, I've done, I think, some unique things. So for example, people have contacted me and said, how do I love this idea. I'm on board. This is great. This resonates so much with me. How do I join? Well, there is a self-dedication rite on the website, luxumbra.org. And you perform the rite. You let us know that you did it, and you're in. That's it. You are a Luxumbrian. That's it. We are self-proclaiming, because I really think that stepping onto this sort of via media, this middle path between light and shadow, has to be self-instigated. There is a lineage aspect afterwards that you connect to, but I think that first step has to be self-initiated, and in keeping with the Luciferian aspect, it has to be self-proclaimed.
Yeah.
Nobody else can tell you that you are this. You have to come out and declare, this is me. This is my path. I'm one of you. And at that point we say, okay, you're in.
Perfect. Welcome to the club.
Exactly.
Yep. It's fantastic. So that's a great spot maybe to wrap it up. Okay. Where do people find you, and where do people check out if this is the thing that they want to proclaim to themselves in the universe?
Well, people find me at Macanally's on the corner. You can find me on Facebook, Mal Strangefellow. I think I'm probably the only one. You can, the church, the Church of Light and Shadow, the Luxumbrian Church, is at luxumbra.org. So that's luxumbra.org. Look under About, or I think maybe the link is, the navigation is Membership. But it's plainly titled Self-Dedication. Click on that. It gives you the right to perform. Read through it. See if it fits with what you're feeling. And if so, man, jump on in. The water's fine.
That's it. I'm leaving the Church of the Subgenius, and I'm coming over to you.
Sweet. We're happy to have you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for making time today. It's been a lovely chatting with you.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, everybody. Thank you, as always, for listening. This is the reboot of this podcast, 101 episodes in. I'm going to have some old favorites back over the next while, and some hopefully delightful new people for you to see. I'm also going to be shaking up the Patreon and starting to add more content there going forward. However, if you would like to support that is always super welcome. You can head over to patreon.com/thehermitslamp and, sign up to support that. That supports the transcriptions, and just me doing this work in general. All right. I hope that you are all well. I have missed doing this, and I would love to hear your thoughts and ideas that came from this podcast.